Help, I'm being held hostage by my own free will. Wanting to diversify the content on my channel, I said, hey, why don't I take a break from all of this F1 stuff and delve into one of my other great loves? That won't be too much work, right? Oh god. Well, now I need a break from my break, so let's go back to the Formula 1 since these videos aren't as intensive to make. Well, until we get to the modern stuff with 20 races a season, and then it will probably be even worse. But that is yet to come. Until then, the year is 1954. Alberto Ascari is now a double world champion, having spent the past 2 seasons being virtually unchallenged in an area of the sport that was almost as peculiar as he was dominant, as Formula 1 was instead being run to Formula 2 regulations. However, after 2 years of this, and seeing that the rules that were supposed to allow for more competition had instead done the precise opposite, the rules were reversed, and thankfully FIA and the F1 have kept it this way forever. Although given the clowns currently running the show, maybe put an asterisk next to that forever. Engine sizes were increased from 2 litres to 2.5 litres. This caused many of the smaller uncompetitive teams like Veritas and Oscar to withdraw as they couldn't prepare cars to these new regulations in time, and it also caused the likes of Cooper to stop sending works entries altogether, leaving only the privateers left. But the rule changes did attract new teams in the form of big manufacturers to hopefully give Ferrari a kick up the backside. Maserati were to be joined by Lancia and Mercedes. Or at least they were supposed to be. Instead, the German cars wouldn't be ready until the 4th round in France, and the innovative Lancia chassis wouldn't be ready until the season finale in Spain. This meant that on the driver front, no man was more disappointed than the defending champion Ascari, as he had left Ferrari due to a salary dispute and had joined up with the new Lancia team. This meant that both he and teammate Luigi Vioresi had nothing to drive for most of the season, and were instead sent on loan only some races to fill vacancies at the likes of Maserati and Ferrari. This meant that it was a pretty much foregone conclusion that someone other than Ascari was going to be champion. Maserati also had problems. They had retained the services of 1951 champion Juan Manuel Fangio, but over the winter, another of their drivers, Felice Bonotto, was involved in a sports car race in Mexico where he collided with the balcony of a house and then hit a lamppost, which killed him instantly. Meanwhile, Ferrari were having to come to terms with life without Ascari as their talisman, with 1950 champion Nino Farina taking over as their lead driver. With so much turmoil, it was difficult to predict how this one would play out. My name is Synapse, and welcome back to F1 Retrospective. The season began in January in Argentina, and if you watched the previous episode, you'll know how badly that race unfolded, so the fledgling Argentine Grand Prix could only improve. Due to aforementioned problems faced by the new manufacturers and the withdrawal of many smaller teams, only 3 constructors were in attendance, those being Ferrari, Maserati and Gordini. In qualifying, Nino Farina would take pole position at the age of 47 and 79 days, a record that still stands to this day. He would best Ferrari teammate Jose Froilan Gonzalez by just a tenth of a second. Fangio would be the highest placed Maserati in 3rd, with the top 5 rounded out by Britain's Mike Hawthorn and France's Maurice Trintignant, both in Ferraris. On race day, the top 3 all engaged in a fight for the lead. However, once Fangio took the lead on lap 65, he wouldn't look back. He claimed a first victory of the year, as well as his first victory on home soil. Farina was 2nd, Gonzalez 3rd, the latter taking the bonus point for fastest lap. Trintignant would bring home a 4th place, while the Gordini of Eli Bayol would survive a race of attrition to claim the final points from 15th on the grid. And say it with me, kids, Indy is irrelevant, and we're not going to talk about it. Following a 5-month break, the season finally resumed in early June at Spa, and there was big news for Fangio. He had agreed to join the upcoming Mercedes entry, however they still weren't ready, so he was still driving for Maserati. Also during the break, Farina had suffered an accident during the Mille Miglia, from which he had still not long recovered. In qualifying, Fangio, having not done any racing in Europe for the last 5 months, crushed his own track record to take pole, a whole 1.5 seconds ahead of compatriot Gonzalez. Almost 4 seconds back from Fangio was Farina in 3rd, unhappy with the way his car was set up. The Maserati of Onofre Marimon made it 3 Argentines in the top 4, while Hawthorn lined up 5th. On race day, while there were 14 cars on the entry list, there were 15 cars on the grid. Lining up at the back was a Maserati driven by Tuelo de Graffenried. He was there to capture authentic footage of the race start to be used in the upcoming 1955 film The Racers. Meanwhile, back at the front, Fangio was jumped by both Gonzalez and Farina, falling to 3rd. Gonzalez, however, swiftly retired with engine failure, and by lap 3, Fangio was leading Farina and then Hawthorn. Fangio had to relinquish his lead on lap 10 as a broken visor strap forced him to pit. 4 laps later, he retook the lead from Farina, who retired with engine failure shortly afterward. This left Fangio practically unchallenged at the front ahead of Hawthorn, as the Brit didn't have the race pace to keep up. Hawthorn was still recovering from an accident that he had suffered at Syracuse, and his pace was falling off a cliff, so the Ferrari team ordered him into the pits to hand his car over to Gonzalez, with Hawthorn seemingly being so exhausted he passed out and had to be lifted from the car. Gonzalez, however, quickly realised why his teammate had passed out. A broken exhaust pipe had been pumping fumes into the cockpit. He pulled in to have it fixed, but he lost a whole lap in the process. All this left him well down the order. Fangio, meanwhile, strolled to a second win of the season ahead of Maurice Trintignant in second, while third went to the privately entered Maserati of Sterling Moss for his first F1 podium. Gonzalez did manage to recover to fourth ahead of home driver Andre Pilet. Fangio therefore had a comfortable 8-point lead over Trintignant at the top of the standings after just 3 races. Meanwhile, Farina and Gonzalez lagged over 10 points behind. For the fourth round at Reims, the Lancia D50 still wasn't ready, so drivers Ascari and Vioresi were sent on loan to Maserati. The Mercedes, however, was ready, and what a car it was. For the 1950s, it was a technological tour de force. The straight 8 engine had direct fuel injection and was mounted behind the front axle for better weight distribution. It had an aluminium space frame chassis and ultralight magnesium alloy bodywork. The team fielded German duo Karl Kling and Hans Hermann to partner new signing Fangio. Mercedes immediately stamped their authority by taking a 1-2 in qualifying, with Fangio setting an average lap speed of 124 miles an hour ahead of Kling. Ascari marked his return with an excellent third, with Gonzalez and Marimon taking up 4th and 5th respectively. On the day of the race, everyone but the Silver Arrows were simply blown out of the water. Fangio and Kling roared off into the distance, leaving everyone else for dead. No one could cope with the pace of them. Ascari retired on lap 1 in a dismal return to the championship. Hawthorn's engine blew up in spectacular fashion on lap 9, with Gonzalez's following on in sympathy a few laps later. Even though they were completely unchallenged at the front, Kling and Fangio continued battling for the lead for virtually the whole race, until finally on the final lap, team orders were implemented, with King dutifully slotting in behind Fangio, as the two crossed the line in formation to celebrate a debut 1-2 for Mercedes, with third driver Hans Hermann claiming the fastest lap point before he retired. Only 6 cars finished the race, with Robert Manzon taking a surprise podium in a privately entered Ferrari. Prince Biro was 4th, and at least one of the Lancia loanees went away with points, with Vioresi putting in a good drive for 5th, from 15th on the grid. Fangio's dominant third victory of the season, combined with both Trintignant and Gonzalez failing to score, as well as Farina not being in attendance, meant his championship lead increased to a whopping 16 points. Had Fangio made an inspired switch? A bumper crowd turned out at Silverstone to see if Mercedes could repeat the trouncing they gave their rivals at Reims. Only 2 Silver Arrows were entered, one for Fangio and one for Kling. Ferrari entered the experienced trio of Hawthorn, Gonzalez and Trintignant. Maserati, by contrast, entered 9 cars. In qualifying, Fangio took a 3rd straight pole position, setting a new lap record and becoming the first driver to lap Silverstone with an average speed of over 100 miles an hour. Joining him on the front row was Gonzalez, followed by Hawthorn. Both Sterling Moss and Jean Bera put in Herculean efforts to put their cars 4th and 5th on the grid, out-qualifying the second Mercedes of Kling. Race day came, and with it came the British summer weather. It was cold, and the track was soaking wet. On this wet track, Gonzalez took the lead at the start and never looked back for the next 90 laps, while the Mercedes seemed a handful to drive, the rain perhaps exposing its one weakness, a tendency for lift-off oversteer. Even El Maestro was struggling, colliding several times with oil barrels that were lining the circuit. Gonzalez took the flag over a minute ahead of teammate Hawthorn on a dream day for the Scuderia. There was a second Argentine on the podium, but it wasn't Fangio. Instead, Onofre Marimon took the final podium place, with Fangio dropping to 4th. Trintignant would round out the points in 5th. Also, not for the first time, more than one man had set the fastest lap. When this happened, the points were split between the 2 drivers. Except there weren't 2 drivers. There were 7. As a result, Gonzalez, Hawthorn, Marimon, Fangio, Moss, Bera and Ascari would all be awarded 1/7 of a point each. What a stupid rule. With this result, Gonzalez moved into second place as Fangio's primary challenger, and Fangio's advantage at the top was reduced slightly. Still, Ferrari would have been hoping that it kept raining. Where are we heading next? Formula 1 arrived at the Nürburgring 2 weeks after the race at Silverstone. It's a fierce track this, a green hell. Even today it's one of the most dangerous tracks in the world, and sadly it was about to show everyone why. During practice, the Maserati 250F, driven by Onofre Marimon, sped down the hill towards Versailles turn. As he was going through the bend, he lost control, slid down an embankment and crashed through a tree. The car somersaulted and eventually came to rest upside down, pinning him under it. Rescue workers were able to free him, but it was in vain, as he died a few minutes later. He was 30 years old. To this day, it's not known what caused the accident, but a leading theory is brake failure. Marimon's death cut short a promising racing career under the mentorship of fellow countryman and family friend Fangio. His death is also marked the first time that a driver had been killed during a Formula One championship event, and sadly he will be far from the last. In response to his death, his Maserati teammate Luigi Vioresi, as well as the privateer car entered by Ken Wharton, withdrew from the event, while others chose to keep going. Fangio would take a fourth consecutive pole position ahead of Hawthorn and the privateer Maserati of Stirling Moss. Hans Hermann's Mercedes would line up fourth with Gonzalez in fifth. Fangio led away from the start of the race. Early retirements included the high-starting Moss, as well as Hawthorn and Hermann. Pre-war great Hermann Lang would spin out of what would prove to be his final Grand Prix on lap 10. Fangio led Trintignant and Gonzalez. On lap 16, Gonzalez, still visibly distraught from the death of his compatriot, was ordered into the pits to hand the car over to Hawthorn, who set off in rapid pursuit of Fangio. He passed Trintignant for second before a rain shower forced him to ease his pace and settled for second. Fangio took a fourth win of the season, while Gonzalez and Hawthorn would split the points for second place, ahead of Trintignant in third. Carl Kling, having not put in a time in practice, put in a barnstorming drive from the back of the grid to fourth, setting the fastest lap in the process, while the third Maserati of Sergio Mantovani claimed 2 points for his grieving team. This win meant that Fangio now had double the points of nearest challenger Gonzalez, meaning that a win at the next race in Switzerland would be enough for him to claim his second title. Three weeks after the race in Germany, the F1 circus pulled into Switzerland. Both Gonzalez and Fangio knew they needed a win. A win for Fangio would mean the title, while Gonzalez needed to win to keep his faint title hopes alive. Score 1 would go to Gonzalez as he pipped Fangio to pole by 0.2 of a second. The two Argentines were in a league of their own at the front, being the only two drivers to set a time in the 2-minute 30s. Almost 2 seconds ahead of Moss in third, Trintignant was fourth, Kling was fifth, Hawthorn sixth, and Hermann seventh. Fangio then jumped Gonzalez at the start. Gonzalez soon dropped to fourth, first being passed by Moss and then Hawthorn. The two Brits, while attempting to catch Fangio, battled ferociously in a thrilling spectacle for nearly 20 laps. It was only brought to an end when Moss's engine failed on lap 21. Hawthorn would join him on the sidelines less than 10 laps later after an oil leak. As a result, Gonzalez was promoted back up to second, but nobody could stop Fangio. He had led every single lap, set the fastest lap and lapped the entire field up to second place, and had become the 1954 world champion in dominant fashion. Gonzalez came home in second, while Hans Hermann made it a double podium for Mercedes. Argentine driver Roberto Mieres would mark his first race as a Maserati works driver with fourth place, and Sergio Mantovani made it back-to-back points finishes in fifth. A bonus piece of trivia about Hans Hermann: as of the time of writing, he is still alive at the age of 96, making him the oldest living Formula One driver. Fangio was champion, his lead now unassailable. The best Gonzalez could hope for would be to hold on to second ahead of the likes of Trintignant and Hawthorn. After this race, F1 would never again return to Switzerland, and the Bremgarten circuit would eventually be abandoned. The title was over, only 2 rounds to go, but the Lancia D50 still wasn't ready. Ascari was therefore driving for Ferrari, a team that he had left over a salary dispute, at the home of the Tifosi, the fans that used to cheer his name fervently. He was immediately on the pace, just 0.2 off of Fangio, who took yet another pole position. Moss was third, yet again, showing everyone that he was far too good to be without a works drive and that it was only a matter of time before somebody picked him up. Kling was the fourth man to set a time under 2 minutes, while Gonzalez was down in fifth and Hawthorn was all the way down in seventh. Kling led off the line before falling back behind a duelling Fangio, Ascari and Moss. The Italian was back, finally getting to enjoy some substantial racing this season. He led most of the first half of the race until on lap 48 his engine gave up. He had so far scored just 1/7 of a point. It had been a miserable season for the now former champion. Now Stirling Moss found himself in the unlikely position to claim a maiden F1 win until he too was struck down with problems just over 10 laps from home. Fangio would therefore claim his third straight win, his 6th of the season, ahead of Hawthorn in second. Meanwhile Gonzalez, whose gearbox failed on lap 16, had been handed the car of Ferrari teammate Umberto Maggioli. and had stormed through to third, taking the fastest lap in the process. Hermann and Trintignant would round out the point scorers. In the championship standings, Hawthorn moved to less than a point behind teammate Trintignant, looking to steal third in the final race. Another piece of trivia, in the crowd for this race was a 14-year-old Mario Andretti, American racing icon and future world champion and Indy 500 winner. Well, it took until the final round, but at long last Lancia had arrived. The D50, using a clever 90-degree V8 engine as a stiffening aid for the chassis itself, was a simple car, but it was brilliantly designed. Ascari took to it like a duck to water, immediately taking pole position by over a second in front of Fangio. Hawthorn was a further 1.5 seconds back, while the American Harry Schell was a surprise package in fourth, ahead of Ascari's teammate Vioresi in fifth. Why, oh why, could this car not be ready a few months ago, they must have been thinking. Unfortunately, it didn't go to plan. While the car was brilliantly fast, it was Italian. Even when a car is simple, reliable just isn't a word in their vocabulary. Vioresi retired with brake troubles after just one lap. Meanwhile, Ascari initially led off the line, but he only made it 9 laps before his clutch gave up. Schell, Trintignant, Moss, Hawthorn and Fangio were all battling for the lead. However, Moss's car overheated on lap 20 after an errant flying newspaper clogged up the radiator. Schell then spun off on lap 29 and Trintignant's gearbox failed on lap 47. The race was boiled down to a duel between Hawthorn and Fangio. Hawthorn led, with Fangio in pursuit, however the Argentine's charge was to be halted. He was losing oil and soon found himself battling just to nurse his car to the finish. As a result, Hawthorn would take the win ahead of the Maserati of Luigi Musso, who passed Fangio's wounded Mercedes in the closing laps. El Maestro, for his part, did a great job to bring his car home in third place ahead of fellow countryman Mieres, and Carl Kling and the sister Mercedes would make the final points-paying position. This would be the final time that F1 would race at the Spanish circuit, as it was later abandoned and F1 wouldn't return to the country until 1967. Hawthorn's win meant that he overtook Trintignant to finish third in the overall standings, and in fact was less than a point away from taking second from under Gonzalez's nose. The season really could be summed up like this. The two titans, Ascari and Fangio, both took the plunge to join new teams. Both showed tremendous faith and patience. Fangio was awarded with a title. Ascari, meanwhile, had less than 2 points to show for his efforts. While Fangio's dominance this season perhaps wouldn't have given you the impression that upheaval was imminent, the attentive among you might have realised that 2 of the tracks on this calendar would never be seen again, and 1 country would never return again. I didn't spoil the reason why, because although it wasn't an event that occurred during an F1 race, its impact was seismic and affected the world of motorsport forever. 1955 would bring a dark cloud to this wonderful sport of ours. Until next time.